of this. He's the co-chair, as you know, of the Harris-Walz campaign, and a happy co-chair at that. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator, you're right now. I thought a commercial was coming. You know, Senator, you get to be my age, and you just check to see that you still have a pulse. So let me ask you about, obviously, you're a candidate. She obviously still has a pulse. She did her homework. You know, a lot of conservatives saying it was a stacked deck with the moderators. I always find that to be kind of a silly argument. It is what it is. I get it. But what did you make of that? And Donald Trump saying, you know, that it was 3 against 1.
Well, Neil, look, when your team doesn't have a good game, you yell about the refs making bad calls. Clearly, Donald Trump did not have a good game. He came across as angry and sullen, backwards looking, filled with grievance. And from the very first answer, Vice President Harris focused on her positive agenda. I'll remind you that she specifically talked about small business and job creation, trying to expand the tax cut that you get, or the tax credit that you get, to be clear, for starting a new business. She made a series of proposals about working to improve the costs of housing, of prescription drugs, to fight a red tape that slows down job creation in business. And she kept trying to come back to substantive policies that will help middle-class Americans. There was a lot of back and forth. Much of the time she tried to, in a bemused tone, say, Donald, that's great, thank you, Mr. President, and get back to talking to the American people about what she's accomplished alongside Joe Biden in terms of strengthening our energy production, record highs for the stock market, record low for unemployment, investment in manufacturing and infrastructure, and to then talk about her agenda going forward. I think she had a really good night. I think folks who've been complaining about the moderators are working the refs and complaining because their guy didn't have a good night.
I was just surprised. You mentioned a lot of figures there that might be you know, very persuasive for your candidate to make, but I was more surprised that Donald Trump afterwards didn't click through some of the things that happened under her watch, along with Joe Biden's watch. The higher inflation, still high, just not as high. You know, obviously some of the stuff that's going on abroad and all of the wars and everything else. But I did notice, Senator, that the fact is that he was interrupted, probably should have been interrupted, and fact-check when it came to, you know, migrants eating cats and dogs and all of that stuff, and then, you know,
yes,
killing babies after
he
they're
should
out
have
of the
been
womb.
interrupted about migrants eating cats.
Absolutely. But there were no interruptions when there were some whoppers coming out of Kamala Harris on his alleged support for Project 2025. He's constantly disavowed that, or his views on in vitro fertilization. In fact, he wants the federal government to pay for that sort of thing for couples, and that there are no American troops in a combat zone overseas, when, as you know, they're on the precipice of that no matter where they are. So that there was a sort of more allowance to let her get through and say stuff than Donald Trump. So what do you make of that?
Well, what I make of that is that he was saying things that were not just misrepresentations of fact, but whoppers. The particular one you just raised, the allegation he made that there is a town, I think it's Springfield, Ohio, where there's a record number of immigrants killing people's pets and eating them. It was at moments like that that the moderators interrupted to say, that's been disproven. There's no evidence at all for that. And frankly, Neil, I think this is part of your role.
Right,
the
Senator?
press on the next day is, I think the next day, part of what we're doing in the after-debate discussion is fact-checking some of the things that are more normal, more standard about, you know, did inflation grow by this much under your presidency or yours? Who grew more manufacturing jobs? She, for example, made the point that while President Trump was president, there was a net job loss, that only Herbert Hoover and Donald Trump had a net loss of Americans working, and that under the Biden-Harris administration, there's been close to 18 million jobs created. He debated that, said, no, this was all post-pandemic bounce-back jobs. That's the sort of thing we could debate factually.
Well, right, and absolutely,
I think economists will say.
And Donald Trump could have talked a lot about the environment in that final year with COVID and all. But you're quite right. There could have been a lot of nitpicking back and forth on that. Having said all of that, Senator, I wonder whether you would advise Kamala Harris to have another debate, or should she just sit on this one? What do you think?
I think she had a great night. I think she managed to draw him out on some of the worst of his rambling conspiracy theories and backwards-looking, angry focus, and she managed to present a positive and forward-looking agenda. I think the American people would like to hear more from both of them about what will you do to make us safer and stronger at home and abroad, and I think she should accept an invitation from Fox to come on and debate President Trump.
What about how you see it going now? I mean, it always amazes me at this stage that these undecided voters, I don't know how many there are. You're up on this stuff far more than I am. I imagine a lot of people's positions are set, but a good many are not. So I rely on the polls that show that.
It's a pretty thin layer of undecided Americans at this point.
Do you think that this debate tipped it? With independent voters, they were going Donald Trump's way. I wonder after the debate, you still see that being the case.
Look, I do think that the debate, to the extent folks watched the whole debate or got to watch some clips of it, moves independents and undecideds in Vice President Harris's direction. She seemed and was poised, in command, confident, particularly when she spoke about decisions she's been involved in on the world stage and some of the ways that she challenged Donald Trump about his leadership as president. The war in Ukraine, the willingness to stand up and fight for freedom, the expansion of NATO, investment in our military. She was clear and forceful on a number of important points that would allow an undecided voter who maybe hasn't watched her before or paid close attention to say, that's someone who could and should be commander-in-chief. That's one of the areas where I thought she needed to make a clear showing of her capacity to stand up to Donald Trump, to put forward a positive and clear record, and to make it clear that she will stand by our troops, invest in our military, and work to keep the United States safe at home and abroad by strengthening our alliances, something she's got real experience doing as vice president.
Some might alter that a little bit about they want to know exactly what that experience was as vice president, but you're quite right. That could come up in another debate, couldn't it? Senator, it's always good seeing you.
Yes, it could.
Thank you. I'm sorry for my confusion at the beginning. But it is.
Thanks, Neil. Great being on with you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.